What's going on, boys and girls? It's your boy Brandon B coming at you with a very special presentation I call Project Who Shot You. The reason I call this Project Who Shot You is because that song, looking back on it, would ultimately foreshadow the 30 years following the deaths of Biggie and Tupac. Recently, a man named Keefe D was indicted for the murder, as he's said to have confessed to at least being in the car that night. Frankly, I don't believe it. And if you'll indulge me for a little while, I think I have a compelling theory as to why we should believe Suge when he said that Keefe D and Orlando weren't the guys. There are a lot of theories and stories surrounding the deaths of these two rap legends. Some say Suge killed Pac, some say Puff did. Some say Puff put a bounty on death row chains. Some say Suge held Vanilla Ice off of a balcony because he owed money. But where's the truth? I had questions, so I started digging. Going all the way back to the beginning, Suge was making his way up the food chain in the music industry. Meanwhile, Tupac was building his career in movies and music. Over in NYC, the man who would become known as Diddy was making a name for himself with Andre Harrell. Diddy would ultimately end up signing Biggie, who at the time was trying to leave the streets behind to make a life in music. Now, I'm not going to get into their individual backgrounds and stories. I'll post something on my blog about that, where you can watch the videos that I watched, or click on the articles and read those articles and stuff like that. Instead, I'm going to pick up where Death Row first started. All right, so we're picking up in the time frame of 1990 to 1993. Tupac is making movies and music. For all intents and purposes, he's a star. He and Biggie meet during that time period. In that time frame, they become friends. It's said that Biggie was frustrated with his situation with Puff Daddy and that they weren't making any real money, and he, was hanging around Tupac, who was a star at that time, and he wanted to reach that same status, and Tupac was like, stay with Puff Daddy, he's gonna make you a star. But Tupac would, keep on mentoring him, and they would have a good relationship. Tupac would ultimately end up spending a lot of time in New York, being a celebrity, going around the country, and he would ultimately film Above the Rim in New York as well. And so he ended up meeting a guy named Haitian Jack. Now, some people say that Biggie introduced Haitian Jack, but I believe the far more credible story is that Tupac was hanging out at the same nightclubs as Haitian Jack, and just observed him and wanted to meet him at some point. They're both kind of celebrities. Tupac didn't know who he was, wanted to know who he was, and I believe that that's the more credible story. I also believe that to be the more credible story because later on, like I said, Tupac would ultimately film Above the Rim, and it said that he modeled a lot of his character off of Haitian Jack's behavior and stuff like that, because they were hanging around with a lot of gangster types and stuff like that. And it's also said that Haitian Jack took Tupac out, and they bought Rolexes, and that's when Tupac started to become a little bit more flashy with the jewelry and stuff like that. So I find that to be the more credible story, just because, like I said, Tupac was a talented actor, and I believe that he could have been hanging around with Jack as his friend, and then ultimately started to model himself as the way that Jack did with the flashy jewelry and all that kind of stuff. But I'm going to pause right there and flip over to Suge Knight, because I feel like that's a great place to pick up, because the story sort of takes off at the point when Tupac meets Haitian Jack and their friendship starts to blossom. During that same 1990 to 1993 time frame, Suge was making his career as a bouncer, and then a bodyguard, and then eventually he would parlay all that into becoming a music producer. Over on the West Coast, NWA and Ruthless Records were making hits at the time, and they were led by Eazy and Jerry Heller. Ice Cube and Dr. Dre would eventually leave over money disputes. Dre would leave with the help of Suge, and Dre says that Suge was the one who pointed out that he was getting screwed on his end of the deal. And, I believe that, Dre just wanted to be treated fairly. You know what I mean? Now, they say that there was some sort of extortion, there was threats of violence or whatever and stuff like that. Suge Knight has a history, a record. He has, there are rumors. There are recordings of him saying stuff. I mean, the man's in jail right now. So I'm inclined to believe that he did coerce them very strongly. Now, I'm not saying that, there was any guns or, beating anybody up or anything like that. I'm not saying it. If it's out there, if there's proof of it and there's connection of it, I don't know. You know what I mean? I'm not going to put that out there like that, but I'm just going to say that Dre would ultimately end up leaving, right? And no one had to die for that to happen. No one, you know what I mean? But the point is that, Suge approached them and got them out of that. So Dre and DOC leave, and that would help start Death Row Records, because at that time, that move would give Suge, Dre, DOC, Snoop Dogg, and several other artists, and those artists would pretty much launch Death Row Records into the spotlight. Now they have the artists, they have the deal with Interscope Records, they have the industry connections. They just need the money to get these guys in the studio and start producing. So Suge goes to Vanilla Ice and quote unquote asks for the money that he's owed on the song Ice Ice Baby. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, Vanilla Ice wasn't the person who wrote the song Ice Ice Baby. He was just the face of it. So it said that he owed money on the song, right? So every time the song played, a certain amount of money needed to be paid to somebody somewhere, and it just so happened that Suge Knight would be the person who would be in a position to collect that money. So Vanilla Ice, through transitive property, would end up funding The Chronic and Doggy Style, and this is important because it wasn't until after Tupac was signed that there was any beef between Puff, Biggie, and Junior Mafia and all of that West Coast stuff. So now I'm going to pause and we're going to go and jump over to what Biggie and Puff were doing during that same time frame. Puffy and Big lived different lifestyles. Puff at the time was already working in the music business with Andre Harrell at Uptown Records. Biggie was a street artist that dabbled in crime to pay the bills. After Biggie's last stint in jail for selling crack, he decided to make a mixtape that, for all intents and purposes and in today's lingo, went viral. And it landed him a feature in the Source magazine. That feature would somehow make its way towards Puff Daddy, who would listen to the demo tape and end up signing Biggie to a deal with Uptown Records. And, they would get him into some performances, open up some shows and stuff like that. So at that point in their careers, they were both still trying to establish themselves. Puffy would get fired from Uptown Records, and then he would immediately sign Biggie as his first artist with Bad Boy Records. And like I said, they're still trying to establish themselves. Like, you have to understand, Biggie didn't drop his first album until 94. So we're talking about the time frame of leading up to 94, when I don't want to say when Biggie hit the peak of his success, because 90 to 93, him and Puff, like I said, they were still living their separate lives. It wouldn't be until 92 that Puff and Big would sit down and actually start working together. So you're talking about 90, like late 91, early 92, maybe mid 92, that they start actually talking and meeting and rolling in the same circles and stuff like that. So there's a lot going on. And during that time, Big is hanging out with Tupac. I mentioned that, Big was a little frustrated with their money situation. Like I said, Puff got fired from Uptown Records. He's starting his own thing, and now they're trying to do something on their own and get money on their own. And like I said, it's not like they're not doing anything or they don't have any work, but when you're building something from the ground up, they want money. And he's hanging out with Tupac and seeing the way Tupac's living, and Tupac is escalating his lifestyle because he's hanging out with Haitian Jack and stuff. So you see how that trickles down in human behavior. You see somebody who's living a lifestyle that you want to live, and that's why Biggie reached out to Pac the way he did. That's why I believe it's plausible. You know what I mean? I believe it's plausible because Tupac at that time had made multiple movies and had already a successful album. So he had money coming in. Now, I'm not going to say he was rich, but he was seemingly wealthy. You know what I mean? He was appearing on the outside to have all that. And so that's why, Big would spend a lot of time with Pac, because he wanted that lifestyle. He wanted to be in that successful lifestyle. So ultimately, like I said, they would spend a lot of time together, and that's well documented. That is well documented. It's also worth noting that during this time, Big also warned Tupac about hanging around Haitian Jack. And it wasn't just Big either. Mike Tyson, it's documented that him and Tupac were friends, and Mike Tyson came out, said that he warned Tupac about hanging around Haitian Jack. Now, what happens next is pretty much the culmination, or I don't want to say the culmination, the kickoff point of the trend, of the events that led to the death of these two rap legends. So now the stage is set, and we're going into the end of 93, and we're rolling towards 94 and 95, because there's a lot that goes on in between 93 and 95. A lot of critical points, things that I believe, really changed the trajectory of these two rap legends. So like I said, by the end of 93, leading up to the end of 93, there's no beef between Suge, Pac, Jack, any of the key players. There's no beef. There's nothing going on around there. They all have good relationships, and Suge Knight, for all intents and purposes, isn't even in the picture, except for the fact that he is working on the West Coast to produce music. But that's going to change, because in the November of 93, Tupac and Haitian Jack are hanging out at a nightclub. They meet a woman. The woman goes back to goes back to Tupac's hotel, and eventually she would later come out as saying that these guys raped her. Now, I'm not going to get into the nuance and talk about the details of the rape case, because that is a completely separate issue or topic, to talk about and dive into. However, the result was that Tupac ultimately started to believe, or get it in his head, that Haitian Jack might have been an informant. And this is where I believe that Tupac's judgment started to lapse, and he started to make grave lapses in judgment, right? Like, he started playing a game of life and death, and he didn't realize it until it was too late. So Haitian Jack was one of the men named in the allegations, in those rape allegations, molestation allegations, whatever they were. Like I said, I'm not going to get into the nuance or the detail about it, but whatever misconduct happened that night, Haitian Jack was said to have been party to it. There were also guns involved. So when you talk about illegal firearms and a crime being committed in that same vicinity, having illegal firearms, or having firearms, whether legal or illegal, during the commission of a crime adds to the sentence, right? So if you're just sitting in a hotel room, the cops show up and they find the illegal firearms and nothing else, you're going down for the illegal firearms, right? But if the cops show up and there's illegal firearms and there's drugs, you're going down for possession of drugs and the illegal firearms. And that's what Jack was trying to avoid, because as everybody knows now, Haitian Jack is deported because of some stuff he did. He tried to avoid deportation. And what is the one thing on those, the thing that could really send him back to, where he's from, was those gun charges. If he would have got caught with those gun charges, there's a chance that he could have got deported, right? He's looking at rape, sexual allegation charges, and gun charges, right? So I'm pretty sure that under the advisement of his lawyer, that he took some sort of plea agreement. He pled guilty to a lesser charge. His lawyer was able to legally maneuver him out of the case with the guns. And now he's just looking at a lesser sexual crime. Now, this isn't an odd thing. And here's why. Just give me a sec. Let's review, shall we? There were rumors that Tupac was being watched by the feds because of ties to revolutionaries. He had an aunt who fled to Cuba. Okay? That's something that's floated around out there. That's fact, that he had ties to people who, were part of movements that the federal government were marking as domestic terrorists. So that's an important thing to note, okay? The second thing is that Tupac shot two crooked cops and got off scot-free. All right, and if there's one thing John Q. Law does not like, is people shooting John Q. Law and getting off scot-free. And then you have to understand that during the 90s, there were people that were actively campaigning against rap music because they were saying it incited gang violence and it was just too graphic and this, that, and the third. I mean, there were a lot of people who were out to, even to this day, there are people who still go out and denounce rap music. And these are all reasons that it would be more reasonable to assume that the federal government and the law was trying to make an example of a well-known rap artist movie star versus the unknown assailants that were with him. right? Because Tupac had victory. He shot 2 cops. It was in the news. He shot 2 cops. Now he's a famous rapper. All this is doing is adding to his fame, his celebrity. So now if they can get him on this beat, on this rape charge or whatever, these gun charges and stuff like that, guess what? They can start knocking that celebrity down and start combating crime like they want to. They have legal victories to hinge their political campaigns on, and Tupac being the face. You see what I'm saying? So it is more reasonable to assume that the feds just had a hard-on for Tupac than it is to assume that a man who was literally trying to avoid deportation is snitching. Because Haitian Jack didn't stop doing whatever dirty stuff he was doing. He kept on doing it, which is why he's deported now. There are people who say that Haitian Jack tried to extort Tupac, but there's nobody who can really corroborate that story. And let's be honest, does anybody really believe that Tupac was extorted? No, I believe that they had a good relationship. And I believe that instead of Tupac actually having a conversation with Haitian Jack and trying to understand the legal maneuvering behind why they had their cases separated out, because it was Tupac's hotel room. I don't know whose guns they were, but it was Tupac's hotel room. And Haitian Jack doesn't seem like a dummy. He doesn't seem like the guy who's going to be carrying an unregistered piece on him. So at the end of the day, to me, it's just more reasonable to assume that he was not set up. But it's easy for Tupac to believe that he's set up because he's the one that everybody's trying to pin all that shit on. Now, after all this stuff with the allegations and everything like that, like I said, Tupac is, he believes that Haitian Jack is an informant. Okay? Whether he's saying it out loud, whether he's putting it in the newspapers, whether he's talking to it behind the homies, it's in his head somewhere. Okay? And now he's going through this trial and this lengthy trial and stuff like that. And all this stuff is going on throughout the year of 94. And exactly a year later, the night before he's supposed to be sentenced, he's shot at Quad Studios 5 times in what they're saying was a robbery. And again, this is where Tupac is making grave errors in judgment. Because he starts putting it out there that after this all happens, he's sentenced and everything like that. He's saying that, Haitian Jack, Jimmy Henchman, and all these people, Puff, Big, they all had something to do with it. They were all in on it somehow. Some people say that Tupac doesn't blame Big and Puff for the shooting, but he blames them for not having information. And my question is why would they know? If you know the background of both of these men, at that point in time, Puffy was trying to keep Big away from the streets and dealing drugs and being in that lifestyle because they were trying to build what Puff has today. Now, can you imagine somebody who's trying to build something like that today, jeopardizing what they've got over some street beefs and all that kind of stuff? No, I can't. Especially if you believe that Big was the dope boy, right? And you believe that Puff was the one who said, chill out with all of that, work with me and we can make music and everything, then you have to believe that they might not have known what was going on. Because they really were just sticking to the music aspect of the business. They weren't in that gangsta lifestyle. Now people say, now I'm not going to sit here and say that, Tupac wasn't a gangster. Like at the very least, he was loosely affiliated in some way, shape, or form, but he was not mobbed up. He was not clicked up, right? And I'm not saying, that's 100% loosely affiliated means like somebody could probably tie him to something somewhere, okay? Just because of people who he hung out with. But I'm saying like he wasn't repping the signs and everything. He wasn't repping the gangs and everything. Not as far as I can tell or what I know. So why he would expect Puff and Big to have information about gang-related activity when these guys are trying to remove themselves from that activity? I mean, Big even warned Pac about hanging out with Haitian Jack. So why would he warn him about hanging out with a guy and then turn around and set him up with that same guy? That doesn't make any sense. So now Tupac's looking at jail time. He's been shot. He believes that all the people that were in his camp, there's people that, snitches and spies and turncoats and stuff like that. And this is where things start to get even more hazy, because now some guy in his entourage named Stretch is supposedly slipping Tupac's notes from the enemy saying that they weren't trying to rob you, they were trying to discipline you. Then he gets another one saying you don't want to go to war with him, you need to get your money right. I mean, all of this stuff is referenced in Tupac's music. You can go back and listen to the songs. All of this stuff is referenced. So why is a guy in Tupac's camp sliding him notes from the enemy? Well, if you fast forward to all these years later, Haitian Jack says that he had nothing to do with setting up Tupac that night at Quad Studios. Now, if I had to venture some vague idea or an educated guess, I would say that Haitian Jack might have a good idea, might have had a good idea of what was going on or what happened after it had transpired, but only after it had transpired, because he said he wasn't offended so much to the point where he felt like he needed to send a message to Tupac. Tupac was his friend. And I'm sure that on some level, if that's what he's saying, he probably wanted Tupac to come talk to him and holler at him and find out why things shook out the way that they did. Because it wouldn't have even taken Haitian Jack snitching for the legal maneuvering to go around, because all it would have taken was Haitian Jack's lawyer going, hey, look, Haitian Jack didn't know anything about those guns. He don't know nothing about those guns. He was there that night. He can give you whatever. He can answer certain questions and stuff like that without implicating himself, but that's about it, right? So what information could Haitian Jack have offered up to them, really? He couldn't have lied on Tupac, because as it was found out that all Tupac was guilty was found by a guilty of his peers of was grabbing a woman's buttocks. They couldn't prove the forced sodomy and all that stuff. The woman had consensual something with him earlier in the evening. So again, the story just kind of gets hazy and fuzzy. Things are starting to get murky. But the theme that's emerging here is that Haitian Jack, there's a good chance that Haitian Jack didn't have nothing to do with it. And this was all just an unfortunate series of circumstances. Because if you follow the story, it comes out that a guy named, his last name is Isaac or something like this. His last name is Isaac, Dexter Isaac, I think his name is. He comes out and confesses to being one of the ones that shot Tupac and robbing him that day. He said that Stretch and Jimmy Henchman were the ones that set him up. Stretch was Tupac's man. Jimmy Henchman was friends with Haitian Jack. Tupac had all the ties with Haitian Jack. You see what I'm saying? So all of these things are starting to fall back right towards Tupac, which leads me to believe that, again, Haitian Jack might not have had nothing to do with it. Because Haitian Jack says that there were guys who didn't like what Tupac had to say about Haitian Jack in public and felt that a message needed to be sent. But Haitian Jack disagreed. It was his friend. And I could see that. Right? I mean, there is a code on the street. There is an ethic. But there's always one person who feels like they know what's best. Even if you're the boss and the leader, the one in charge, the shot caller, whatever, there's always going to be somebody who's got to challenge that authority or feel like you're not doing enough and they got to take matters into their own hands. And Haitian Jack even references that. That's why I say, like, after the fact, he might have found out what happened. He might have heard what happened and stuff like that. Now, why he didn't divulge such information to Tupac? Why would he feel so inclined to? As Tupac, what would Haitian Jack gain from telling Tupac what happened? What he knew. Tupac was already too far gone. He was claiming he was a snitch, claiming he had them all set up and stuff like that. What would he do? What would he have to do? What would Haitian Jack have to do to make that man believe it? Now, do I believe that Haitian Jack would have been above a sit down and trying to clear the air? No. I believe that's exactly what he was waiting for. But it never happened. It never happened. So like I said, now Tupac, we're going from 94 to 95. Tupac's been shot. He's got all of these dark thoughts in his head about all the people who are closest to him setting him up and doing this, that, and the third. And you know, now he's going to jail. So Tupac's looking at jail time. And in February of 95, he begins serving his sentence. Biggie starts rising to fame. Coincidentally, he releases Who Shot Ya, which further convinces Tupac that he's behind the setup at Quad Studios. Death Row Records is becoming a force out in the West. And, for all intents and purposes, Tupac is in a dark place in his life because, he's blaming everybody for a set of circumstances that seem to be completely outside of the control of anybody who would have any control over said situation. In jail, he releases his next album. He releases, an album, which one was it? Me Against the World, that sold 2 million copies. And like I said, despite that success, he's still in a dark spot. He doesn't know who to believe and who to trust in this situation. He still believes that Puff, Big, Haitian Jack, and Andre Harrell have something to do with him getting shot and being set up and being in prison. I mean, and Tupac being squarely in the middle of this can't see what's going on. There is, in my mind, what I'm looking at is there's no grand conspiracy against him. Napoleon is one of the guys who was an outlaw, who was close to Tupac. He even said that it's likely that Tupac got into an altercation with Jimmy the Henchman, or he had said something about Jimmy the Henchman that Jimmy the Henchman didn't like, and that's what caused him to set him up, right? So to me, it's less about some grand scheme against him, but more like some low-level players trying to make some money. I mean, if we need to look for a motive here, right? Stretch, Jimmy Henchman, and Dexter Isaac. These are all low-level guys. These guys they're not Tupac, they're not Biggie, they're not making big hits, they're not making big moves and stuff. Jimmy the Henchman just hangs out with Haitian Jack. I don't really know what his affiliations are and stuff like that. But these guys aren't dealing in. They're not the masterminds behind all this stuff. Right? They're the guys who just collect paychecks. They're the gophers. They're trying to do something. They might have some ambition. It sounds like Stretch wanted to be a musician and stuff like that, and that he was making albums, but he wasn't having the same sort of success that Tupac was. I mean, it's very plausible that these guys were just trying to make money. I mean, $40,000 in jewelry, and if we're to believe Dexter Isaac's story, a quarter brick of cocaine, or whatever it was. I mean, that's not a small amount of money or a little proposition. And then Dexter Isaac was paid what, $2,500, or Dexter Isaac paid Stretch $2,500, and you're talking about Dexter Isaac getting to keep the jewelry and stuff like that. He says he even has a chain. Now people are like, oh, he's in jail doing life, so we got to take our time. We got to take with that with a grain of salt. And it's like, all right, well, let's think about that for a second. Why wouldn't he confess? He's not getting out of jail anytime soon, so why wouldn't he confess to doing it? Why wouldn't he say that he was there and snitch on everybody? This man's going to spend the rest of his life in prison. What the fuck does he have to hide from? And like I said, if we need motive, it's something as so simple as needing money. And then you have a guy like Tupac who's out here talking about Haitian Jack as a henchman and Jimmy the Henchman. Haitian Jack as a snitch and Jimmy the Henchman set him up and all this kind of stuff and everything like that. So now they have an axe to grind against Tupac. My point is that these guys were not professionals, right? Tupac had to have seen them. He argued with him. There was an argument. I guess Tupac blamed Stretch for not jumping in and stuff like that. So in my mind, these guys weren't professionals, because professionals wouldn't have left witnesses. Tupac wouldn't have been breathing after the thing. Lil C's came downstairs and the guys told him to get back in the elevator and go back upstairs. And if you believe any of that story, these guys were not pros. They were amateurs. And they were only there to get Tupac. And Tupac says, oh, they didn't take my Rolex and whatever else. Again, amateurs. These are not professionals. I can't imagine a guy that they're painting out to Haitian Jack to be, or any of these guys paying contract killers and being this ruthless, passing cute little notes saying they didn't do this to rob you. They did it to warrant, to discipline. Like, I can't see somebody sending cute little notes like that. Everything I've heard about gang life and stuff that I've seen, they send messages, not vague notes. They send firm messages. I believe that if Haitian Jack wanted Tupac dead, he would have told him as such. He would have told the man as such, and he would have had it done. That, or it would have just been done. There wouldn't have been no robbery. It would have just been Tupac dead. Especially if they're painting this man out to be some sort of nefarious, they're painting this out to be some sort of nefarious he's painting this out to be some nefarious NYC cabal that's out to get him, right? So why would they pussyfoot around sending him little cute notes? Oh, you don't want to go to war with me unless you got your money right. Nah. Think about it. When Tupac got out of jail, did he slide Biggie and Tupac a little cute note saying, I'm coming for you guys? No. He put him on notice. Hit him up was a fucking declaration of war. So like I said, these guys were amateurs. And Tupac just was too close to see it all. Tupac was just too close to see that some guys just decided that they were going to take matters into their own hands and, for better or for worse, try to change their future, change their luck. They saw an opportunity. And again, I'm not saying that Haitian Jack didn't have some suspicions or didn't find out some shit after the fact. But again, why would he be inclined to pass along any sort of information to Tupac when Tupac already suspected him as being in on it? What would the information that he give? Oh yeah, I know who did it. Well, Tupac would have been like, I know you know who did it. You're the one who fucking set me up. So why would he divulge that information? All that's going to do is further put Haitian Jack. Now, if Tupac would have came, like I said, if Tupac would have came and sat down with Haitian Jack, I believe that there would have been a sat down. There could have been some mediation. There could have been some clearing of the air there. But there wasn't. There was just nothing but animosity. And like I said, Tupac was in a dark place. And this is where his biggest lapse in judgment comes from. He turns to Suge Knight. Tupac's in a pretty precarious situation. If you believe all the stories about Haitian Jack and the extortion and the violence and everything like that, and you believe that Biggie and Puff had something to do with, Tupac getting set up and shot and all of that stuff, then you have to believe that these men are dangerous, right? So you can understand why Tupac would have been in a precarious situation or felt like he was in a precarious situation, because if you're dealing with dangerous people and like he was, and saying the things that he was saying, calling them snitches and informants and all this, that, and the third, I mean, Tupac knew that he was in a precarious situation, which is what made him reach out to Suge Knight, because he needed an ally. He needed somebody to help him out and I don't want to say protect him, but he needed some allies to confront the situation. And this is what I believe this is what I believe is Tupac's biggest lapse in judgment, because Tupac wasn't a gangster like Suge Knight was. Suge Knight was running shit like he was a mob boss. And I'm not saying that Tupac didn't roll with, hard motherfuckers, or that he wasn't a gangster himself. What I'm saying is that there's a difference between being in the mob and being a single solitary thug from the streets. And that's what I believe Tupac was, a single solitary thug from the streets. Now, I'm not saying thug in the negative connotation, like, oh, he's a thug or dead. No, I mean, like, there are people out there in the street that you can see that you just don't mess with. You talk to him, you don't mess with him. Tupac was probably one of those people. You say some slick shit to him, he's not gonna let it ride. He'll say something to you and he'll correct you. And if it comes to a physical altercation, he's going to take it to that place. He's not afraid. And that's just what I mean by a thug. So like I said, Tupac reached out to Suge. Now, I don't know the ins and the outs of the relationship of Suge Knight and Tupac prior to Suge Knight bailing him out of jail, signing him to Death Row Records. Reggie Wright Jr. says that when Suge Knight went to go meet with Tupac, he had no intention of signing a deal or anything like that. There was no deal. He didn't know if there was a deal to be done or anything. He just went to go see him because he had reached out to him. So Tupac reaches out to Suge and says, hey, look, help me get out of jail. Help me destroy Bad Boy, this, that, and the third, la, 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 and da, 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 da. Suge agrees, right? So there's a three album contract in place. And not only that, and this is a very important piece of the puzzle here to remember, Tupac, when he signed that deal, he also signed away his rights to negotiate on his own. Any business dealings that Tupac would have done, or anybody wanted to do with Tupac, would have had to come through Suge Knight and Keener, the lawyer. And that's important to remember, because for all intents and purposes, that means that they own Tupac, and he's not allowed to do anything outside of what they allow him to do or approve for him to do. Now, I'm not saying that they were going to control him and this, that, and the third, but it is important to remember that, because that's how Death Row makes their money off artists. What the artists produce, their likenesses, their images, and stuff like that. So the deal is done. Suge gets the money, bails out Tupac. Tupac gets out of jail, and he gets hard to work producing albums because Biggie's dropping his album. He dropped Who Shot You while Tupac's in jail, and Tupac is ready to get back to work. So he drops more albums. He drops a double album and then a third album. I mean, he does a lot of work between he gets out of jail, and then he drops that song Hit 'Em Up. This is probably, in my opinion, the most violent that I've ever heard Tupac get, because it was a declaration of war. And you can see where Tupac's mentality started to change, especially as he got hooked up with Suge Knight, because I believe that Suge Knight enabled that darkness that was within Tupac to keep flowing and rising to a point where he created Hit 'Em Up. If that makes sense. When you have somebody who's pissed off and angry and has a chip on their shoulder and a grudge, that bodes well for someone like Suge Knight, because now he can aim him at a target and let him go. So Death Row signs Tupac, and a little bit after that, there's an award show. I think it was like the VMAs or something like that, where Death Row gets on stage and Suge takes a shot at Diddy and the bad guys at Bad Boy Records. And in the background, they have Tupac on a picture of Tupac. They've just signed Tupac at this point. So now Death Row Records is starting to put together this star ensemble of rappers, and they're really gonna make a go at, trying to dominate the rap game. Those shots from Suge Knight at Bad Boy Records is pretty much the first traces of there being any sort of beef between Death Row Records and Bad Boy Records. Is pretty much like Suge Knight assumed the beef on behalf of Tupac and escalated it, right? So in 95, there's another incident where Suge and Diddy get into an altercation. I believe that Suge Knight slaps Diddy, and then somewhere in the evening, Diddy's bodyguard kills Suge Knight's bodyguard and friend, which then takes that escalation to a whole nother level, because now there's gun violence, a death involved, and now there's, that bloodshed. Violence begets more violence, right? And so this feud between Death Row and Bad Boy Records is starting to quickly escalate. And the reason it's even gotten to Death Row is because part of the condition for Tupac to signing with Death Row was Suge Knight helping him destroy Bad Boy Records. Once you have that sort of mentality, you can see why things started to go off the rails, because you have Suge Knight, who's running shit like the mob. You have Tupac, who is in this really messed up mindset. He's confused. He doesn't know what's up, what's down. He doesn't know who to trust. He feels like his life is in danger and stuff like that. But one thing he knows is that Suge might for real have his back, right? So he's just gonna go hard in the paint. And then, like I said, that 1995 shooting happened where Suge's bodyguard got killed by Puff's bodyguard. That really complicates things. That makes things it takes things to a point where there is no return. They're not gonna sit down and just talk this out. Things keep progressing, and then eventually there's word out on the street that, Puffy was putting out a bounty on Death Row chains. He was given $10K for Death Row chains, but no one's been able to substantiate those claims one way or the other, right? There hasn't been any sort of confirmation about that type of thing. Now, I'm not saying that it didn't happen. I'm just saying that, to me, it's far more believable that Diddy and Biggie were trying to distance themselves from all the chaos, because what they were trying to build. If you look at what Diddy has done since all of this has popped off, he's pretty much stayed clear from a lot of different things. You know what I mean? Like, there's not a lot of trouble that he's been in. I think ever since that it was the gun violation or the gun beef or something like that he had. J-Lo broke up with him, but ever since then, he's been a very clean guy. Now, I'm not saying that he hasn't done shit behind closed doors because he's drunk on power, but what I'm saying is I don't believe him to be some mafioso type guy who's putting hits out on people behind closed doors. At the very worst, he might be making somebody walk to fucking Harlem to go get a cheesecake, or maybe, you know, somebody might have a gripe about him because he said some slick shit to him because he's the boss. Outside of that, I don't necessarily know what's true and what's false. But what I do know for certain is that the next thing that happened that sort of escalated things was an altercation at a nightclub in Las Vegas where Suge and Tupac bumped into this guy Orlando, beat the shit out of the guy, and that's the night that Tupac got shot. He was shot and killed. Now, I can go into detail about all the little things, but these are the major events that happened and transpired that led to the death of Tupac and Biggie. Because right now, like I said, you have Tupac, who's out here talking recklessly about a bunch of dangerous people he feels are trying to kill him. He's out here talking all this reckless stuff on the song Hit 'Em Up. I mean, death threats, shoot 'em. I mean, just really violent and reckless stuff. Stuff that, you know, if I were a man and I heard it, somebody was like, oh, I'm gonna fucking shoot you, I'm gonna kill you. Yeah, if I heard that on a record, I might be a little pissed off too. I might want to see what this cat's all about too. If he's really about that life, if he's really trying to kill me, I want to find out and I want to know. Because if we're gonna fight to the death, or it's gonna be something to the death, I need to know what it is before he come for me, right? I got to keep my head on a swivel. So like I said, you have all of this whole animosity and drama brewing, and coincidentally, it also stirs up an entire coast. It stirs up coasts, because on the one coast you have Suge Knight, who is at the very least blood affiliated, right? Like, he might not be mobbed up in the Bloods, but he definitely is affiliated. He definitely acknowledges them, and for some reason they definitely acknowledge him. So now you have this gang feud, this street gang feud tied into this feud that, you know, might not, that in my opinion, between Tupac and Diddy and all those guys, it wasn't even there. There's all this stuff going on, like I said, and that night that he gets into Orlando Brown, that's the culmination of all of Tupac's hard work over the years. All the stuff he was saying, all the reckless talk he was doing and stuff like that led up to that night where he got into that fight, and then it ultimately led to him getting shot and murdered. Now, the weird thing to me about the situation is that the guy who supposedly murdered Tupac was paid by Suge Knight to lie on the stand and say that Suge didn't actually fight. He was trying to stop the fight. Now, why would Suge Knight help out a guy or pay a guy $60,000 to lie for him if he had seen him in the car shooting Tupac? Does that make sense to anybody? Would you pay $60,000 so you don't go to jail to the guy who just shot your homie? Don't make no sense, do it. But let's move on a little bit. After that, Biggie gets murdered. I believe it's like 6 or 7 months after that, Biggie gets murdered. He goes out to LA against some warnings to not go out there. He goes out there anyway. And I understand what he wanted to do. He wanted to go out there and try to make amends. He wanted to go out there and try and squash this whole East Coast, West Coast shit, because he didn't have nothing to do with none of it. This was all shit that is linked to a series of unfortunate events. But against people's wishes, Biggie goes out there and then he gets murdered. And then for years, people are asking questions. Who did it? There's speculations, there's theories, the police investigation. I mean, years things went on. For a long time, there was no movement on the case. It was closed, whatever. And then there was a detective that did some work, and he came out and said that there might be some dirty cops involved in this. Some cops connected to death row. So Biggie Small's mom wants the case reopened because there might be some cops who are complicit in his murder. And sure enough, what this inquisition turns up is that there are 3 crooked cops. Now, these cops never confessed to being a part of death row. They never confessed to working directly for Suge Knight. But I believe the reason they did that is because they were coerced into giving other testimony. Now, I don't know who coerced them, whether it was Suge Knight or whether it was the LAPD. But you can see why on either way, there's some coercion. Because if it's found out that the LAPD had cops working for death row, that's a $400 million lawsuit. That could potentially bankrupt the city. So what do these city officials do? They do just enough of an investigation to make it look like these cops, yes, were dirty, but they had no dealings with Suge Knight, death row, or anything. And they did a damn good job covering their tracks. There are documents where off-duty cops were working in death row clubs or working around death row parties, and things happened. A man was beaten to death, and the bouncers at the club were cops, off-duty police officers. They did nothing to stop it. This information is out there. You can go look it up. So eventually they get to the end, so the LAPD gets to the end of this, and I don't want to say the end of the investigation, but they get to a point where they have enough evidence to just say that, you know, it was somebody else who was there for the shooting with Tupac and Biggie and all of that stuff. The LAPD had nothing to do with it. Those three crooked cops, they just happened to tip their hand all around the same time. It just happened to be a coincidence that they were all doing shady shit and they all happened to be loosely linked to Suge Row. It's all just a coincidence. It's what they're trying to sell to us. I don't buy it. I don't buy it. So after everything I've read, found, researched, and looked up and dug into, my theory on it is this. Tupac got hit up at Quad Studios by three guys who were fucking amateurs, right? They needed the money and they had an axe to grind against Tupac for whatever reason. Even if it was just Jimmy Henchman and Tupac getting into some verbal altercation and Tupac saying some slick shit to Jimmy and, you know, this, that, and the third. But I don't believe that Haitian Jack orchestrated any of it. I've watched the interviews about Haitian Jack. I've heard Haitian Jack's story. I've listened to what he's had to say. And if you listen to him talk about him and Tupac, it really does sound like him and Tupac had a genuine relationship. They were genuinely friends. I don't believe that Haitian Jack had any sort of reason or benefit to put a hit out on Tupac. And here's the biggest reason I think that. Why would a man plead down to a lesser charge to avoid being deported, turn around and then murder somebody and risk getting deported? I mean, Haitian Jack got deported for crimes, don't get me wrong, for crimes that he committed, don't get me wrong. But his whole MO for that time frame was trying to avoid getting deported. So if he got in trouble, he was trying to not get into any sort of trouble that would get him deported. Guns, violence, any of that type of shit. He was trying not to get deported. Ultimately, he did get deported. But why would he risk his status over over a misunderstanding that Tupac had, his friend, right? So I believe that the three guys who set Tupac up and shot him and stuff like that at the Quad Studios, I believe that it was all just three amateurs who fucking tried to knock him off. And then they tried to pin it on Haitian Jack with those stupid little cute notes. You don't want to go to war with Jack. They did this to discipline you. They wanted to scare Tupac. They wanted to make it seem like there was something bigger than what it was, right? Because these three fucking idiots on their own, they knew Tupac. They knew who he was connected to. They knew who he knew. And I bet you dollars to donuts, if Tupac would have went to Haitian Jack, I bet you Haitian Jack probably would have helped him correct the issue. Now, I don't know how they would have corrected the issue, but I can't imagine that Tupac would have came and been like, yo, I think your boy Jimmy the Henchman set me up. And Haitian Jack would have been like, that's what I heard. You know what I mean? Like, I believe that Haitian Jack would have been like, you know what? He did set you up. I had nothing to do with it. However you want to proceed, we can proceed. But I can't imagine he would have just been like, yep, that's that. I ain't got nothing to do with it. You do it. You know what I mean? They were friends. And because Tupac went out and started talking reckless, calling him an informant, a snitch, and all of that type of stuff, there are people out on the street who don't take kindly to that kind of talk. Even if it is on behalf of someone else, they will try to settle the score. Just like Haitian Jack said, you can tell a group of people something, but there's always one motherfucker in that group who thinks they knows better. Always. So do I think Haitian Jack at the very least knew what happened after the fact? Yes. But why would he be inclined to go talk to Tupac, who's on a fucking warpath, calling him an informant and a snitch, saying that he has something to do to set him up? I would have done the same thing Haitian Jack's had done. I would have kept my fucking mouth shut about it. I'd have been like, I'm no informant, I'm no snitch, but I'm not gonna go back and retaliate and say none of this, that, and the third. I'm not gonna send my goons to come get this man. If this man wants to talk to me and we're friends, he can come holler at me. If he got beef, he can come holler at me. We're friends. Otherwise, he can walk all that baby shit down the street. But here is what I think happened to Tupac. Actually, I think Tupac was set up by Suge Knight. I do. I think that Suge Knight set up Tupac that night to be murdered. And I know some people are like, well, what's the motive? What's the motive? Why would Suge do that? He was in the car, blah, 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 blah. Well, I mentioned earlier that Tupac signed a contract, a handwritten contract that gave exclusive rights to Tupac, essentially, to Death Row Records. And if you do your research, do a little bit of digging, talk to some people, listen to the people who might be on the inside and the know, there are several credible sources that say that Euthanasia was a production company. It was supposed to be like an all-purpose production company that Tupac wanted to use to make movies. But it's also said that he was going to move away from Death Row Records. At the very least, there was going to be some sort, at the very least, let's just call it Death Row Records East, okay? So what happens when Tupac fills his 3-album contract with Suge and the Lawyer? Guess what? Tupac is no longer obligated to cut them in on whatever he's doing. So that means that Suge is going to be missing out on a lot of revenue. Ask yourself, why did Tupac fire the Lawyer? Why would Tupac fire the Lawyer? That's because Tupac was trying to get his own shit going, and he could not negotiate without Suge and the Lawyer. It was in the contract. And I imagine that Tupac didn't find out any of this stuff until he started putting things in motion, and things started coming back. Hey, we can't do this because this is in your contract. You can't do that because this is in your contract. If I'm not mistaken, Death Row Records owned all of Tupac's masters. So again, if Tupac really was trying to move on and do his own thing, what happens to Suge Knight? He falls by the wayside. Here's the thing that people need to understand about the record business. Interscope was the distributor. Death Row Records was the producer, right? All the labels are under Death Row Records, which is under the umbrella of Interscope. So if Tupac would have finished his 3-contract deal and started his own thing, even if it was Euthanasia, right? That takes the revenue from Suge, and they were making a lot of money at that time. They stood to make a lot more money off of Tupac at that time. So do I think that what's the motive? Money. Suge wasn't willing to let Tupac move on. They had a disagreement about it, and I think Suge set him up. I think that fight with Orlando Brown was just a convenient cover. Why else would he pay a man $60K to lie for him when he just shot his homie? And even Suge says that it wasn't those guys. It wasn't Keefe D and it wasn't Orlando. And I know some people might say, oh, well, Suge was in the car when the car was shot up and blah, 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 blah. You have to understand something, folks. Just because the car was shot up doesn't mean Suge was sitting in it the whole fucking time. They could have shot Tupac twice. He could have got out of the car. They shot around and shit like that. I mean, think about it. How miraculous is it that 14 fucking bullets are shot into that car and Suge Knight is grazed by a ricochet or shrapnel or something like that? What are the fucking odds? And what better place to be than next to the motherfucker you're trying to have killed if you're trying to keep suspicion off of you? And I think the reason nobody wants to talk about it, Vanilla Ice included, is because the only person who could actually fucking do something about it is still alive, Suge Knight. Even though he's in jail, P can still reach out to the streets and have people touched. It's not impossible. And this is why I say it was a grave mistake on Tupac's part, because he started fucking with real gangsters. Men who were not willing to let people just walk away. Dre left. Then Snoop Dogg wanted out. Snoop Dogg even had to go to Master P for help to get out. And Master P helped him out. Apparently Master P and Suge had a conversation where Suge was like, LA ain't big enough for all of us. And Master P was like, I just bought a house, so when you moving? So when you're talking about money, they're, like I said, and these mobsters and gangsters and stuff, they're gonna do everything they can to retain it and try to keep it. Who benefited the most from Tupac's death? Suge. Because if I'm understanding it correctly, he would have thought that he owned all the rights to Tupac, all his music, all his masters. I mean, they even released the posthumous album after he died. And that's my theory. I believe that Suge Knight had Tupac set up and murdered, and then I believe that he had Biggie murdered too. Yep, that's what I believe. Now, if I disappear, y'all know who did it. Catch me next time, guys. Peace.